Hi there, Mark here, and we are about to start our first chapter in the book from McGraw-Hill, Understanding Canadian Business, also often referred to as the Nichols book, and it is called the Dynamic Business Environment. So, here is a list of learning objectives. I tend not to read those out in class because I know you know how to read, and you will have them sink in better if you read them yourselves. So I will tend not to read too many of the learning objectives. One thing that we tend to do in these chapters is very often we will have a chunk of time allocated to definitions. The reason we go through these is that we want everybody to have a same level of understanding of the business language. Every type of field that you go into has their own language. Business has a certain language, psychology has a certain language, science has a certain language. And then with each one of those fields, there are subfields where the language gets more specific. For instance, there are terms that are marketing terms or accounting terms. Okay? So that said, goods. Goods are products that we can touch. They're tangible. Computers, food, cars, appliances, clothing. Okay? Services are intangible. We can't touch them. Education, why we're here. Healthcare, insurance, recreation, travel, tourism, those type of things are service-based. We can't touch them, but we can experience them. And what is a business? A business is, or a business in general, not a business specifically, but business in general is any activity that seeks to provide some sort of goods and or services to others while generating a profit or revenue. And an entrepreneur is a person who risks their time and money to start and manage a business. And entrepreneurship plays a huge role in the Canadian economy, as well as the economies of many countries around the world. Revenue. Revenue is the amount of money received during a period for the goods and services rendered or sold, and from other financial resources. So for instance, if we had a bond, we would receive interest payments on that bond. So we bought a bond, and every quarter, every 6 months, every year, we would receive an amount of interest that would be part of revenue. Revenue would also be what we get for selling a computer or installing the computer and have somebody pay us for the installation. Profit is the amount left over after we take account of all of our other business expenses. Okay, so we sold X, we had Y in expenses. If we take Y away from X, we have a positive number, that is a profit. If Y is greater than X, i.e. our expenses are greater than the amount of money we brought in, then we have a loss. One of the other things that we very often deal with in business is risk. Risk involves the chance of a loss, the probability of the loss, and the amount of the loss, both in terms of time and money. So if we look at the amount of a loss, okay, if I take on an endeavor and I risk to lose 50 bucks, not a big thing, I can afford 50 bucks. But if I take an endeavor on and I could lose $1 million, well, I think we would all agree that $1 million is a much bigger potential loss than 50 bucks, and as a result the risk is greater. What else? What about the degree of probability, or the amount of probability? What's the likelihood of our loss? Okay, so let's look at the $1 million and $50 case. Okay, I stand to lose $1 million, but the chance of that is 1 in 1,000. Whereas I stand to lose 50 bucks, the chances of that is 50-50. Interesting. So the probability of loss is 1 in 1,000 for $1 million, but 50-50 for 50 bucks. That certainly might change the way I think about that $50 loss. What we haven't taken into consideration is the other side of the coin is, that's my risk, what's my potential gain? If it was a $50 loss or a $50 profit and it's 50-50, that's literally a coin toss. Okay? If it was a $50 loss but a $1,000 profit, hey, I might be willing to take that risk. I could lose 50 bucks, not going to make much difference to me, but I could win 1,000 and my chances are 50-50. Yeah, I might take that one. So you can see the likelihood of the loss and the amount of loss play a factor in what you consider risky. Standard of living. The standard of living is basically the amount of goods and services you can buy with your money. We live in Kamloops, which has a fairly good standard of living. We compare that to Vancouver. Vancouver is much more expensive than Kamloops. The houses are more expensive. The apartments are more expensive. The food is more expensive. So for the same money, you have a lower standard of living in Vancouver than you would in Kamloops. Another term you'll hear as well is quality of life. That is the general well-being of a society in terms of freedom, the environment, education, healthcare, safety, how much time we have to go play, and things that bring joy to our lives. Okay? Sometimes standard of living and quality of life go together. Certainly your quality of life increases for most people when your standard of living increases. If you're not concerned with, do I have enough money to buy food, then that gives you more opportunity to increase your quality of life. Stakeholders. Stakeholders are anybody who stands to gain or lose by the policies and activities of a business. Okay? Anybody who stands to gain or lose by the policies or activities of a business. And what I want you to think about is, who are the stakeholders of TRU? I'm going to give you a few seconds to think about who are the stakeholders, who has an interest in the policies and activities of what TRU does. Okay, it's really weird for me to be completely quiet even for a few seconds. Normally in class, people would be raising their hands saying, hey, this and that. Okay, so who are some of our stakeholders? Here's a list that I came up with of some of our stakeholders. Yes, I totally did this in the 12 seconds I gave you to respond. No, of course not. So let's start with our customers. Who are our customers at TRU? You guys, the students. You have an interest in what goes on at TRU. Okay? Shareholders. Well, we don't have any shareholders at TRU because universities in Canada are owned by the government. Bankers. Definitely the bankers are interested. Why? Because we have a whole lot of money going through the university. We have tuition from you guys. We have government payments. We have students who are moving to Kamloops who set up bank accounts. So certainly bankers are interested. Media, definitely. Media is very interested in Thompson Rivers. Why? Thompson Rivers is a large employer and a large player in the local community. Just before the semester started, I did an interview on CBC Radio about coming back to school and dealing with online learning. Suppliers have an interest in TRU. Suppliers are people who provide goods and services to the university. The computers, the chairs, the cleaning services, security. Government leaders definitely have an interest in TRU. Why? Well, the government funds us. As high as your tuition may be, it does not cover the cost of your education. Okay, the government subsidizes that. Government's also interested because taxes need to be paid. And you guys pay taxes as well. If you move to Canada from outside of Canada or outside of British Columbia, you're going to be paying tax when you buy stuff like groceries and food. And if you buy a car or clothes or anything, there are taxes to be paid. Certainly employees. Employees are interested because they want to keep their jobs. And we have lots of employees at the university. Retailers or dealers, not so much for the university, but certainly for other businesses. Environmentalists are concerned. Why? Well, the university uses a lot of resources. And TRU actually won a Platinum Award for sustainability. Pretty impressive. And of course, surrounding community. Our surrounding community is very interested in TRU. Why? Because they've grown up with TRU. TRU is a relatively young institution. It started, I believe, as Caribou College, then became University College of the Caribou, and then became Thompson Rivers University. We've grown. I remember when I first got here, I ran into a gentleman who was retired, and he was working as a volunteer at the hockey rink downtown. And he had never even been on campus. He had retired from a blue-collar job. He didn't go to college or university. He'd never even been on campus, and he was so excited that TRU was getting a law school. This was in 2010, 2011. He was so excited we were getting a law school. Never even been on campus, so definitely community has an impact. And I'm sure if you put your minds to it, you could probably come up with more people who are stakeholders in our business. A few more definitions here. Offshoring, sourcing part of what we need from outside of the country. Okay, this happens all the time. Why? Usually due to differences in labor costs or raw materials costs. It is less expensive to get something done elsewhere, so we will very often offshore. Outsourcing is different. Outsourcing is a similar concept in that we were going outside of our company to get something done, but it is more based around a function, like accounting or security. For instance, at TRU, we don't employ security guards. We hire a company to provide security for the university. So that's outsourcing. It's very often done if an organization wants to focus on what they consider their core or their core competency. Oh yeah, you know what? Security, university is not in the business of providing security. University is in the business of education. So we can outsource our security requirement. Okay? Legal work is another one that very often gets outsourced. Why? Because we don't necessarily have enough legal work to employ a full-time lawyer. That's another reason we could outsource. Accounting is sometimes outsourced, but that one would generally be in more than out. Apparently my package is delivered. What else? Well, outsourcing and offshoring could impact our community because we may be employing people who aren't in our community. Definitely offshoring, we're purchasing from another country. Outsourcing, my lawyer could be in Vancouver. I'm in Kamloops. My accountant could be in Toronto. Okay. And then the opposite of outsourcing is insourcing. That's basically bringing stuff back in, doing stuff in-house that may have been done outside of our organization before. A not-for-profit organization is an organization that is not geared to making a profit. It's usually around a cause, like the SPCA, the Society for Prevention of Cruelty to Animals. They're around a cause of saving animals who are in bad situations. Okay? Don't get me wrong. Not-for-profits do earn money. They need money. They need money to survive. And at the end of the day, a not-for-profit doesn't have on their accounting statements a profit. They have a surplus. Essentially, it is money left over that they didn't spend, i.e. their expenses were less than their revenue. So that's important. Why? Because they want to continue to provide that service or help whatever cause they have. Social entrepreneur is another term that we hear more and more these days. Basically, we can create businesses and have a social aspect to the business that addresses or helps some social need. So we can run a business, in essence, for profit, but built into that business is using those profits to address some social issue. So essentially, a not-for-profit is a business that doesn't have the profit motive. But again, don't get me wrong. Not-for-profits need money to survive. Okay? So let's look at being an entrepreneur versus working for others. Remember, an entrepreneur is somebody who starts a business to risk their money and their time in order to increase their wealth. Okay? If you work for somebody else, that risk is being taken on by somebody else. What do we get in exchange? Well, we get a salary and we get things like paid vacation, health insurance, benefits. Okay? If you're an entrepreneur to start a company, chances are you're not going to have paid vacation time. You're not going to have health insurance from the get-go. But the financial upside is much greater. In a very short period of time, you could become a millionaire or multimillionaire. Unlikely that's going to happen if you work for somebody else. Here's the other thing. You work for somebody else, you probably work a limited number of hours every week. As an entrepreneur, you work when the work needs to be done, which is pretty much all the time. So, business environment. What are the things that surround a business? What's the environment that we work in? Let's look at a bunch here. First off, economics. Okay? What is the economic environment like? Is it a good economy? It is a bad economy. How does that affect our income and expenditures? What happens when we deal with other countries and the currency shift? Is the Canadian dollar strong? Is the Canadian dollar weak? That has an impact on how much we sell. And what type of economic system are we in or are we dealing with? Is it a communist system? Is it a socialist system? Is it a capitalist system? All have impacts on how we run our business. Legal environment is another one that we work within. Certainly tax laws play a huge, huge role in everything from where we set our business up to how we conduct business. When I started one of my Canadian businesses, we had the U.S. subsidiary in Delaware. Why? Because Delaware had very favorable tax laws. That's where we set up our U.S. operations. Contract laws also play a huge role. What's the legal system like? If I get a contract with somebody from another country, is it even enforceable? What's the likelihood that there is corruption in the country, city, company that I'm dealing with? Some countries have higher corruption rates than others. Competitive environment is one you're probably more familiar with. What's going on with my competitors? And this is something that you'll find out in the business simulation game. Your competitors can have a huge impact on your business. Are they customer driven? Are we customer driven? What is their organizational structure like versus ours? Are we top heavy? That means we have a lot of management. Are we bottom heavy, which means we have a lot of frontline workers? Are we lean? Are we bloated? How do we set up the important functions of the company? All has an impact on what's going on. How are our competitors doing that as well? Social environment also plays an impact. What is the diversity of our company? What is the diversity of our market? That has an impact. Different things appeal to different people. Demographic changes also can have an impact. What do I mean by that? Well, in North America, we had something called a baby boom. I technically was born in the last year of the baby boom. It happened after World War II and ended in 1964, which was the last year of the baby boom. So we've got this population bubble that is moving through time. In another 8 to 10 years, most people in the baby boom are going to be retired. That's also a generation that has a fair bit of wealth. What does that mean? Well, that means that all the old people who are going to retire are going to leave vacant the really good jobs. Here is one of the downsides of being at the end of the baby boom for me, is that population bubble was always just ahead of me, so all the really good jobs I had to fight like a dog for. Well, all those jobs in the next 10 years are going to come open. There's going to be lots of potential for upward movement that way. What does that also mean? Changing demographics means changing buying patterns. What else about social environment? Family changes. 50 years ago, people had children much earlier in their lives than they do now. 80 years ago, it was even earlier. If you weren't married by the time you were 23, 80 to 100 years ago, you were old. Now, you don't have to get married. Nobody thinks anything of somebody getting married at 33. What does that mean? That meant that people were also becoming older before they had children. Why? Because of people's desires and changes to how they do things. And lastly, the tech environment, one of my favorites. Tech changes everything. It really does. How we do business today is hugely different than 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 40 years ago. We have these massive databases. You might have heard a term called big data. Well, everybody is collecting massive amounts of data on us. And what do we do with that big data? We try and use it to increase our revenues. And certainly we can't get away without the internet these days, especially these days. That has changed business as well, dramatically. I can start a business off the side of my desk, typical English phrase. I can still keep my day job, start a business part-time, and through the internet, I can make my business seem way bigger than it actually is. I'm a one-person operation who runs a business part-time. Well, guess what? Through the internet, I can create an awesome website. I can get a phone number in any market. I personally have phone numbers in California, New York, and Las Vegas. I can pay somebody a small amount of money to answer that phone number with a live person and say, "Hello, this is Mark's business. Oh, I'm sorry, he's unavailable right now. Can I take a message or would you like his voicemail?" Certainly makes me seem like it's a much bigger business than it actually is. So the internet has dramatically changed things. So legal environment, regulations. How we operate is dependent on the laws around where we operate. The idea behind regulations is it is to protect both consumers and businesses. Okay. Let's take the example of drug development or vaccine development. There are laws that you have to go through a certain process in order to get your drug or vaccine to market. First off, you go through lab testing. Does it work in a lab? Then you move on to animal testing. Then you move on to phase 1 clinical trials, where we inject it into a bunch of healthy people. Then we move on to phase 2 clinical trials. We inject it to people with whatever affliction we're trying to help. And then we move on to phase 3 clinical trials, where we have thousands upon thousands of people take it, and we look for what happens. Then it gets to the point where we have the opportunity to decide whether or not it's worth doing. In today's environment, they're trying to compress those time frames. Okay. It takes, on average, 12 to 15 years to bring a drug to market. A little shorter for vaccines, usually. 12 to 15 years to bring a drug to market, and costs $1 billion US. Okay, it's a very expensive business and takes a lot of time. In the current environment we're in, we are trying to compress that. And we are being relatively successful at compressing it. Bringing a vaccine to market in record time. But we want it to be safe. We want it to have gone through all of the clinical trials through phase 3. So, how does government affect our business? They encourage business through what? Lowering taxation and making the regulations easier to follow, less corruptible, and creating the environment such that businesses can work and thrive and survive. Economic environment. Basically, we look at all of the things that involve running a business and the impact that that can have on the business. We look at the economy from a big standpoint, from a country macro standpoint. What are consumers spending on? What are the unemployment levels? How's our productivity? We look at what happens when things meet expectation or don't meet expectation. Currency markets fluctuate minute by minute. currency markets 24 hours a day. And they're all related to each other. We talk about the Canadian dollar worth so much of the US dollar, or vice versa, or the euro against the US dollar. Okay. The one biggest economic report that moves currencies more than any other economic report happens in the US, and it is called the US non-farm payroll. Once a month, they release what happened to employment in the U.S. non-farm payroll. Does it go up? Does it go down? The experts put a guess as to what it's going to be, and if the guess is right or close to right, then the U.S. currency doesn't move very much. If we have less unemployment, the U.S. dollar gets stronger. If we have more unemployment than the experts guess, the U.S. dollar gets weaker. That single report moves that currency faster than any other economic report around. So what does that mean for us as Canada? If the Canadian dollar is strong, if our dollar is becoming more valuable compared to the U.S. dollar, that makes our exports more expensive for Americans and for other countries. If the Canadian dollar becomes weaker, that makes our products less expensive so we can export more. So there's a balance, right? We don't want it to be too one way because then we lose dollars. We don't want it to be too much the other way because then the stuff we buy from outside the country is more expensive. Personally, my own personal thought on this is the Canadian dollar pegged around 85 cents US is a nice balance point for that. Certainly it is not there now. What else? Canadian government encourages entrepreneurship. There are lots of things the Canadian government does to encourage that. One is we have zero capital gains on the first $750,000 of capital gains in your life. That means if you start a company and you sell the company, up to $750,000 of that profit is no tax. Not all countries do this kind of thing. Technology, already said, changes everything. How we deal with stuff, even look 10 years ago. Okay, the technology we have today changes things and will continue to change things. Here's one that's going to change in the next few years, and it's going to change especially for those of you who want to be accountants. Much of what is done by accountants today will be done by artificial intelligence computers in the next few years. Does that mean we don't need accountants anymore? No, we are still going to need accountants. What does it mean? Our accountants are shifting the way they do work. They're becoming more value add. They're getting away from those grunt work types of things that computers are quite capable of handling. Are we going to need accountants? Definitely. Okay. Is accounting going to look completely different 5 years from now than it did 15 years ago? Without a doubt. Okay. What else? Productivity. Technology increases our productivity. We can generate more given the same level of input. What does that mean? Well, sometimes it means we get to fire people. We need fewer employees. Employees are expensive. Very expensive. Costs a lot to keep employees around. So, if we have technology that can replace an employee, sometimes we'll do it. E-commerce. Stuff that you guys do routinely with your cell phones would be unheard of when your parents were your age. The idea that you could pick up a phone, use an app, first of all, your parents wouldn't have known what an app was that long ago, and order food from your favorite restaurant and have somebody deliver it to your door. The amount of technology in that is amazing as to what that has to do, right? The amount of stuff we buy from Amazon, for instance, is huge and getting bigger. There's different types of businesses, B2C and B2B. B2C refers to business to consumer. This is you buying from Amazon. This is you buying from Walmart. And then there's business to business. This is the university buying from a furniture store. Okay, two businesses dealing with each other. And how consumers buy is dramatically different depending on whether it's a B2C or B2B. And we need to know this if we're selling into those markets. And lastly, e-business refers to any information system application that empowers business processes to be more efficient. A few more technology terms: database, electronic storage of your information. Well, for any information, not necessarily yours. Okay, but yes, you are in a lot of databases. Identity theft is becoming more and more commonplace. The first time somebody in my family had their identity stolen was 1999. And it is becoming more and more prevalent. We need to protect our data. We need to have a better understanding of that. What else? We have privacy laws in many countries. Canada definitely has them. And it is one thing that we are very concerned with at this university, is protecting your privacy. What else? You can protect your own privacy by signing up for, or unsigning up for, the sharing of your information. Telling companies you don't want your information traded, stolen, used. You can put firewalls in. You can use disposable phone numbers or disposable email addresses. And one thing you should definitely do is monitor your credit report to see what's going on there. Social media marketing, again, a term that I don't even think it was coined 20 years ago, right? But social media is pervasive, and now people are figuring out how to make money off of it. Okay. So there's a lot of selling and a lot of marketing done on various social media sites. Facebook, Twitter. We're learning how to monetize TikTok better. We're learning how to monetize WhatsApp better. Okay. YouTube's been around for a long time. Facebook's been around for a long time. Twitter's been around for a long time. Companies are much better at using those to monetize things, monetize their consumers and their stakeholders, and we're learning how to do that with the other social networks. There are ways to communicate with our customers. There are ways to be forward-facing, and there are ways to deal with issues. What else do we have here? Crowdsourcing, using the expertise of a large group of people to solve a problem. As I mentioned elsewhere, diversity plays a role. Different people have different backgrounds, different experience, different knowledge, different understanding. Well, if I can crowdsource that information, then I may be able to solve a business problem I couldn't on my own. Crowdsourcing is also a word used for things like Indiegogo and Kickstarter, going to the crowd to raise money to develop your product. What is in our competitive environment? How easy is it to get in? That's the entry. Very often you'll hear about investors talk about what are the barriers to entry. That means how difficult is it for other people to get into your space? What's the power of buyers? And what's the power of suppliers? Sometimes it's a buyer's market. We'll often hear that saying, right? There aren't that many buyers, so buyers can be selective and force better deals. Who is or are my existing competition? Who's my potential competition, and what substitutes are there? If I ever hear an entrepreneur say, oh, there's no competition, that means one of two things. First is, if there's no competition, then what you're doing isn't valid. Why? Because if there is no direct competition, there must be a substitute. Okay? Or again, it's not worth doing. What are people doing now? There is always competition. So that's one. If somebody comes in and says there's no competition, then it's not worth doing. Or the other one, which is more likely the case, that is they haven't done their homework, and neither one looks good on you. So if you're ever pitching for money to an investor, don't ever say there's no competition, because there always is. So how do we win? How do we compete? Well, we want to exceed our customer expectations. We want to focus on the customer. We want to be honest with them, and then we want to exceed our expectations. How else can we win? We can restructure our companies. We can be leaner. We can be more efficient. We can change to meet the needs of our customers and the changing environment. And we can empower our employees. I'm a huge fan of employee empowerment. Give your employees the ability to solve problems. When I used to run big teams, I often would tell my employees that you are expected to push the envelope. You are expected to push your boundaries. You are expected to get your job done in the best way you can with as much power as you can. And the part I didn't tell them, but I expected they'd make mistakes. And guess what? They did. Everybody is encouraged in my teams to make mistakes. Why? Because that is the fastest way to learn. You are only allowed to make the same mistake once. Why? Because if you make the same mistake twice, you're not learning from your mistakes. And I have very little tolerance for that. I'll tell you a story later in the semester about the guy who cost me $1 million. Man, he pushed well beyond his envelope. Cost me $1 million. It's a good story, actually. I'll tell you later. So that goes with empowerment, right? We give the people the responsibility, authority to do their job. And authority is the big thing. Okay? We want people to be able to respond to our customers. We want people to be able to solve problems. And if you think about it, I'm sure there are times in your history where you can think of, hey, I just dealt with this company and they were awesome. They bent over backwards to help me. That's what we want our employees to do. That's what we want our people who deal with customers to do. So let's look at kind of how things have changed. Traditionally, we've been concerned with customer satisfaction. Now we want to exceed that. Initially, we were concerned with customer orientation. We want to be customer focused. But now it goes beyond that because we realize our business affects so many others. We want to be customer and stakeholder focused. Traditional businesses have focused on profits alone. We want to not only focus on profits, but also be socially aware. Traditional businesses have very often been reactive when it comes to ethics. They do something wrong, they go, oops, we're sorry, that was bad. Now companies are more focused on proactive ethics, not letting the bad things happen to begin with. Traditionally, we've been product focused, make sure our product was good and functional. Now we're looking at quality and service. That helps separate us. Traditionally, we've been managerial focused, i.e. looking at the company, the management of the company, how that works. Now we want to be completely focused on the customer. So, social environment, demographics. Okay? Demographics is a study of human population and other characteristics, age, race, gender, income. Okay? As noted earlier, in North America, we have an aging population. Is it like this all over the world? No. I am a big believer in population economics. Look at India. The population graph of India looks completely different than that of North America. Population graph of China looks different than either India or North America. What can we learn from this? We can learn, to a large degree, what's going to happen long term. Okay. In North America and in Europe, it's generally an aging population. I mentioned earlier, that means there's going to be a lot of really good jobs come available in the next 10 years. Also means there's a shift in workforce. We're getting a younger workforce with less knowledge and experience. We're also having different or an increase in women in the workforce. And we've been seeing that trend since the 70s. Okay. And Diversity is changing. We're becoming much more diverse because it's much easier for people to move around the world. I can guarantee you that TRU's business school population 10 years ago was different than it is today. Today, I believe we have approximately 70% international students in the business program at TRU. I don't know what it was 10 years ago, but I'm pretty sure it wasn't 70%. So we have a changing customer base due to diversity. So let's look a little at the population curves. Okay. These are years, and these are projected percentage of the population in Canada in each age group. So what do we see over here? Well, sorry about that. Boy, that sucked. And no, I'm not going to delete it from the video. There we go. Okay, 0 to 4, it's declining somewhat from 5.7% to 5. 15 to 19, again, pretty stable around 16, 17. 20 to 34, getting a little more diversity, 17.5 to 20.5. 35 to 64, this is the big one, going from 42 down to 37. And here's the other big one, 65 and above, going from 16 to 23%. So this is the effect of the baby boomers getting older. These are links that you can click through in order to see what is going on in other countries. Please take a peek. China and India, one of the reasons I use them is both countries have the potential to be super huge, major players in your careers and for the length of your career. That's the other thing. China and India, I think, both have their own issues to work out, as Canada has its own issues, or United States, or whatever. But if India and China can work through their respective issues, they will be competing with each other for world dominance. That's why I think both those populations are very interesting. And when you look at the population graphs, I think you can see why. So, our global environment. No longer are we just dealing with our own country. There is more competition globally, and that is a two-sided sword. Why? Well, having the internet allows me as a small company to be able to sell my goods and services in other parts of the world. Awesome. I have a much bigger market. I'm from Canada. We have a very small population. We have 36 million people. 36, 37-ish million people. Right? With the internet, I can sell in Europe. I can sell in Asia. I can sell in Africa. I can sell in Australia. I can sell in the United States. I can sell in Brazil. Well, what does that mean? Well, that means that people in those countries can probably sell in my market too. That's the other side of the coin. Okay? Going along with that ability is the increase in free trade. We know that free trade is a good thing. It helps to be able to trade what we're good at making with what other countries are good at making. Okay? What else? We're getting much better at distribution. Although recently we've seen some major issues with supply chain. Supply chain is a word many of you might not have even heard of until recently. But supply chain, it's a major at the business school and a huge, huge field of study. Very interesting. And what else? So I already talked about the internet and communication. And here's one thing that we've seen is increased living standards in many places around the globe due to that ability to trade. So, we can grow our business. We can expand into other markets. I literally just left a meeting with a former student who got his BA here, or a BBA, and his MBA, and now he's working on his PhD. He is running a multi-million-dollar company out of Europe and Canada. That's awesome. What else? New jobs are being created in manufacturing and service. Canada being a largely service-oriented as well as natural resource-oriented country. One of the things, and this will affect you throughout your career, these changes are coming so quickly, we need to stay on top of it. We need to continuously learn. We talk about lifelong learners. You have to be. If you are not a lifelong learner, you are going to get lost very quickly. And what does that mean? That also means that we have lots of potential job opportunities. And new jobs are being created. Here's the thing. 15 years ago, nobody knew what a social media coordinator was, let alone that there was a job called that, let alone that you could have a career in something called social media. That's awesome. Look 15 years from now. What are we going to see 15 years from now that we just can't fathom today? So there's going to be new opportunities. Ecologically, climate change. Certainly, that's affecting our businesses. Carbon emissions is a huge one. How do we reduce our carbon emissions to reduce the potential climate change? But it also means there's opportunities for new businesses dealing with climate change or helping businesses deal with climate change. There's another word we hear called greening. It is the movement towards saving energy and producing products that are less harmful to the environment. The greening of this product, you'll very often hear it used that way. And then, of course, sustainability is looking at our future development that meets the needs of future generations. What can we do today that helps or will help our future generations? Canada's losing jobs in the manufacturing sector, and they've been doing that forever. Why? Because of globalization, we are very capable of moving the job to the lowest paid qualified employee to do the job. Okay? Lots of things there. Lowest paid. You get that. We don't want to pay any more for somebody to do something than we have to. I throw in qualified because we definitely want the people to be qualified at what they're doing. Okay? For instance, the custodian in a hospital may have watched a nurse put IVs into a patient hundreds of times. Could they do it? Probably. Should we let them do it? No. Why? Because they're not qualified. Okay, we want qualified people to do this. What else? We have seen a movement in Canadian business for larger farms and away from the smaller run family farms. Why? Because family run farms are having a tough time to compete. Because they use more labor, they can't get the prices down to where they need to be. So larger farms that use a lot more technology are de rigueur in Canada. And what else? Workers who can't find jobs need to be re-educated. And there have been traditionally a lot of Canadian government programs to help re-educate people. Some of you may be at university now to re-educate and retrain, expand your qualifications in order to be qualified for a new and better job. So what do we have in Canada here? We have a large number of people in the service sector, 79% in the service sector. In the goods sector, 21%, but half of the goods is in almost half is in construction. And we only have 9.3% in manufacturing in Canada. If you looked at in some other countries, you might see services, 5%, manufacturing, 95%. Okay. We also have a small number, 1.7% of people in forest, fishing, mining, and oil and gas, but some of those industries are massive in terms of dollars. So, what do we know about service? Well, technology changes things. Okay, it helps businesses reduce their reliance on employees and increase their profits potentially. Large companies are outsourcing services, creating more potential businesses for service-oriented people. The number of women in Canada is increasing in the workforce. So what does that create opportunities for? Well, if women are entering in the workforce, they may have been the ones taking care of children, preparing food, household maintenance. So there are increases in daycares, in cook at home things, in meal boxes. You know those box meals that show up on your doorstep once a week? Personal chefs, and definitely cleaning, right? If you've ever had a 40-hour-a-week job, the last thing you want to do when you come home is clean the house, right? I had one of my bosses tell me, Mark, one of the best money you can spend is on a house cleaner. And before he said that, he said, don't roll your eyes when I tell you this. All I could think is, don't roll your eyes, don't roll your eyes, don't roll your eyes, don't roll your eyes. And he said, some of the best money you can spend is on somebody to clean your house. And I rolled my eyes. I couldn't help it. And he goes, you're not going to do it. You're going to come back. You're going to think about it. You're going to do it. And then you go, he was right. And it's like, yeah, he was right. My wife and I have both worked our entire lives, and paying somebody to clean our house at certain points was definitely worth the money. Okay. What are some of the areas of service? Well, certainly amusement, recreation, travel, things like that. Amusement parks, ice skating rinks, the animal farm, things like that. We also have business services. Excuse me. Collection agencies, window cleaning, public relations, accounting, all kinds of services. Legal services, lawyers, paralegals, notary public. We will all need those at one point in our life, most likely. Education, schools, libraries, online schools, hey. And health, chiropractor, nursery, dentists, all different types of services. So, what do we go through here? Well, profit is left over. We get revenue, we pay our expenses, we have money left over, that's profit. In order to get that profit, we need to assume some sort of risk. The risk is in terms of our money and our time. Okay? And risk is relative. It's also relative to you. One of you may be more or less risky than somebody else. Stakeholders are affected by whatever we do. A stakeholder is a customer, but doesn't have to be a customer. Remember when I went through that little donut slide and talked about the gentleman I met who was so thrilled that TRU was getting a law school, never been to university, never even been on campus. He is a stakeholder of the university. So look at our stakeholders in our business. Figure out who they are and how we can use them to further our business. Talked about entrepreneurship. Entrepreneurs risk time and money to start and run a business. Within that, there are aspects of the business, factors of production: land, labor, capital goods, entrepreneurship, and knowledge. Those are the 5 factors of production. Chances are there's going to be a question on that somewhere. What else? The elements of our business environment: legal, economic, technological, competitive, social, and global. Chances are there's going to be a question on that somewhere too. Okay. What are the aspects of the business environment? And in Canada, the service sectors replace manufacturing as a principal provider of jobs. We still have manufacturing in Canada. It is important, but 79% of our workforce is employed in the service sector. That said, Chapter 1 in Connect is open. You will have at least a week to complete the homework and take the quiz. Okay? I will be posting, or have already posted, on Moodle how to gain access to the McGraw-Hill Connect part. At this point, you do not need access to SimNet. We will be doing that later. Okay, thank you very much.